Hello and welcome to this week's episode of AP Taylor Swift. We will not bury the lead. We are doing a Shakespeare episode today, which we are incredibly excited about. And we just discussed right before we hit record that this might not be a short one. So just a warning to all of you, our wonderful listeners. Before we get in though, two things that I think just class announcements that might be kind of helpful information. One, a reminder, we do have a bookshop storefront. Bookshop is a really great online bookshop. It's a way for small bookstores to be able to compete with Amazon, so you can conveniently order your books online, but a portion of their revenue goes back into supporting local bookstores, and you can even select your local bookstore, so every time you buy a book on Bookshop, you're also supporting that bookstore specifically, which is really cool. But go check them out.
Bookshop.com/shop/APTS.
Also, make sure to follow us on Substack. Two reasons. One, when we do some more literary themed episodes like today's, which is Shakespeare, as a reminder, we will usually give you a heads up in those Substack emails so you can prepare. But also, in particular, this week with Shakespeare, we are going to be just brushing the surface of some of the stuff we could talk about. So I'm sure that this week in particular, our extra credit might provide additional context that you might find helpful and enjoyable. And we do that every single week. So we do a little bit of extra work for you guys so you can get into more of the stuff we're talking about. So without any further ado, we are going to be talking about Shakespeare, which is a very, very large topic.
How do we do this?
Yeah, two things. So I used to teach Shakespeare.
Who is Shakespeare? Yeah,
Right.
where?
I know. So I used to teach Shakespeare. I actually only taught his sonnets because I really liked teaching The Importance of Being Earnest by Oscar Wilde as my play. I just felt like it was a really accessible play, so I didn't do Shakespeare plays. Controversial decision, I'm aware. But a couple of things I always said about Shakespeare. One, I mean, his sonnets are great too. They're fun to teach and fun to read. But with his plays are meant to be seen, not to be read. Which Monzi broke that rule for today, and we have discussed this off air. So
I know how to read plays.
This is different. We didn't have a whole semester. We had like a
true.
week. So
you certainly can.
Faster at reading than watching plays, unfortunately. So
yeah, you certainly can read them, but if you feel like you're missing things or it's like kind of confusing at times, plays are meant to be seen. So go see one. Pretty much everyone can have access to a Shakespeare play somewhere. There's a lot of like free shows and parks and summers and all that stuff.
There's
if you are ever movies, if you're visiting London, highly recommend the Globe Theatre, which that's like
it's the best. It is the original way to see Shakespeare, and it is just an incredible experience.
Yeah, I feel like there's so many things I love about history, and when I travel, I have so many moments where I'm enjoying looking at everything, but the Globe to me is one of the only experiences where I feel like I am a part of history. I am seeing these plays in the same way that hundreds of people have been seeing them for hundreds of years. There's not a plaque where I'm reading about what happened there. I am actively doing what has been happening. It's a recreation. The original Globe did burn down, but still, essentially, you're part of history. It's really cool. Highly recommend it. The only other thing with Shakespeare, and this is maybe going to be sort of a hot take.
The only other thing with Shakespeare?
That will start with him. Shakespeare himself, the work he did is good. It's super fun. The value in studying Shakespeare is not just that the play is like the most perfect play ever written. But if you look at the things that he wrote, very, very few of his plays are original. I think only 2 of his plays are actually original stories. And even then they still had like, one is The Tempest, and they believe that he got a lot of the details from a letter about an actual shipwreck. So Shakespeare was participating in a long-standing tradition of a rewriting of famous stories over and over and over again. He did do them exceptionally well. He did them with the sponsorship of royalty, so he was really well known. But the reason why we study Shakespeare, there's cool stuff in there. You can get into the way he does rhymes, iambic pentameter, all of that. But in order to understand in the Western English-speaking world how we got to the stories we tell today, that moment of Shakespeare's time and his works are kind of a cornerstone. You can understand and enjoy art today without understanding Shakespeare, but understanding Shakespeare is going to almost always elevate and deepen your understanding of the stories you're engaging with today. So I had so many students who were always like, oh, Shakespeare's hard. I'm like, you're not wrong. It's different. It's, early modern English. It's a different dialect. It's sometimes not super accessible, but it does have value in the way you engage with the world today. So that is why I think we study it.
I actually see Shakespeare as like the original pop artist in some ways, because he did come and make he changed theater in some ways. So he was really prolific. First of all, he came up with a really large number of works, and then because he had the royal sponsorships, and because of the way that the theater was, and because of what might have been going on at that time in history with Queen Elizabeth really being a sponsor of the arts, he was able to just make a lot of these plays accessible to the average person and get everybody in a room and get them all excited about the same kind of thing. And people loved him and people loved his plays. They were funny, they were tragic, they were entertaining, they were a whole event to go to. And so in many ways, like, we're analyzing all this Taylor Swift music. If you maybe like 100 years from now, I don't know if she's going to be known as like necessarily like every individual song is like the best song ever written on its own. But when you look at the collection of work, it's really something.
Yeah.
The catalog is really something impressive, and it's a moment in time.
The cultural impact, right? The cultural impact of a movement.
Yeah.
So Shakespeare really started a movement. And you're saying, Jen, that like his work wasn't necessarily original stories. He also wasn't the only playwright writing plays at this time. And so I think, you know, he's just the one who had the platform, and we find ways to relate to these plays today. And so they are relevant.
Every one of his plays is quoted so frequently. There are lines that
without even knowing. I was telling Jen and Monty, there's a line from one of the plays that we're going to talk about today that I was like, I learned today that I've been quoting Shakespeare.
Yeah, we always are. It's just so mixed into the English language, which is why I think he's the original pop icon.
I love that. That is a good take. He's the original pop icon.
Yeah.
I think he needs an Eras tour. Did he do an Eras tour?
If you do music, I think I put this in actually, again, throughout to our Substack. I talked about this. I think Franz Liszt, that word Listomania, is like musically the original pop star.
You did
like
that in our fall episode Substack.
Yeah. Which is also interesting. And we'll get into it in just a moment, but I will tie this back into Taylor Swift. I actually think your point too, Monzi, is one of the reasons I love studying literature and the arts is I think none of us here or you, our dear listeners, think that this is unnecessary or waste of our time to study the arts. However, even if someone kind of thinks that, it is crazy to me how much of just our daily life comes from even just a handful of people. Because yes, Shakespeare, he had the right platform, he had the right sponsorship, and he changed so much about how we think about plays, the stories we engage with. But if you even go back further, one of the reasons I really love medieval literature is it was a time when we were really figuring out the English language. I say as if we figured it out now, it's constantly ongoing. But Geoffrey Chaucer, so wrote the Canterbury Tales, he again like was quite famous. He worked, I think, in the royal court. The idea of English today, a lot of it comes from Chaucer because his works were popular. It was a time when literacy was so low and most people were speaking or writing in French or Latin, and Chaucer was one of the first with the right platform to write in quote unquote English. It was Middle English, but still that popularized it, and then it started to standardize it. If you study medieval texts written in Middle English, quote unquote, from the same time, some of them are completely unreadable to us today, but you can make your way through Chaucer because that platform, that popularity, that speaking to the general audience and not just the rich people, which is also what Shakespeare did, creates this, it changes kind of the course of the way we engage with things. And that's really cool to me. And tying it to Taylor, I think that's happened with Taylor. I think Taylor's music has in a lot of ways changed the way we engage with music, the way we engage with art. We've talked in other episodes how famous people now are much more engaged with their fans, but Taylor was one of the first to do that. She has the platform, she has the power, she has the talent to kind of change the rules a little bit, and we're seeing that in real time. And so I think this callback to these other people, some people will get really upset if we're comparing Taylor Swift to Shakespeare or to any of these other people, but even if you don't like her, she's changed the game, and that's the comparison that I think is pretty undeniable there. So with that,
let's do it.
Yeah, let's kick it off.
Cool. So I'm going first today. I'm starting off with a classic, the more predictable.
Two classics.
I feel like we always have the one person that's got to go the super predictable
we almost
route.
Didn't though. That's like the fun behind the scenes is like yesterday Jen was like, hey guys, there's one that like none of us are doing. Should we maybe?
Sometimes we just get so excited about a topic that we're all like, what's the most creative way I can do this? Or what's the most interesting way to do this? And then we're like, oh, there was a really obvious connection.
Anyway.
Let's go back to the beginning. Hilary Duff reference. So I'm starting with Love Story, the song that put Taylor on the map, I think.
Just like she put Travis Kelce on the map.
Right. I didn't say that, but yes.
That was Jen. If you'd like a credit for that one, Jen, you can go after her on our socials.
And obviously I'm going to be tying this, or maybe it's not obvious, but I'm going to be tying it to Romeo and Juliet because that is what she mentions in the song.
What a hot take it would have been if you did a completely different play.
This is Coriolanus. Here's why.
I considered it for like half a second. I was like, Romeo and Juliet is not really a love story. It's a like tragedy. We'll talk about it. But I was like, what if there's another Shakespeare play that is better suited?
I think that's a good thing to think. Is there another one?
Yes. So I want to prompt this group to kind of think that as we're like talking through it, like if we like see other kinds of Shakespeare plays in this, because I think that is also interesting. This song was written by Taylor Swift. I've been on a streak of doing Taylor Swift songs recently. Not intentional, but it's just kind of working out that way. And it was on Fearless, first released in 2000, and then re-released on Fearless Taylor version. Was that last year? 2022, maybe? I'll double check that.
Sorry, that was the podcast I was listening to. Anyway, let's pause and find out.
Oh, Fearless was released in 20. So wow, a minute ago.
Was that her first re-release?
Yes.
Okay. Maybe, yeah.
Yeah, Fearless was the first re-release, which is why I didn't have any music videos because she had no idea how it was gonna go.
Yeah.
Is Taylor doing re-releases like Shakespeare doing the two folios of Hamlet? Anyway, sorry, getting different topic. We'll put that in the extra credit.
All I know is that Reputation, Taylor's version, is officially the most anticipated album of 2020. So
and maybe it's out by the time this episode comes out. So
yeah.
What track was it? Anyway, Love Story. Track number.
It's track 3 on Fearless.
But it was the first single.
But it was the first single and beautiful music video. I'm sure everyone has seen it like a million times. So let's dive into this. First off, I want to talk a little bit about Romeo and Juliet by Shakespeare. I'm trying to see if I'm going to sneeze. I'm not going to sneeze. Okay. Romeo and Juliet is required reading for most folks if you grow up in the American public school system. And I thought would be an easy place for us to start today with our Shakespeare discussion, because regardless of how familiar you are with Shakespeare's work, hopefully you've had some exposure to Romeo and Juliet. It is a play, has been turned into movies multiple times. My favorite is the Claire Danes, Leonardo DiCaprio version. There is an older version that is less Baz Luhrmann.
Is that the one that has the guy who looks like Zac Efron? Do you guys not know what I'm talking about? No. This feels like it was also, maybe this was more of a Midwest thing. There's an older version of Romeo and Juliet, and Romeo looks just like Zac Efron. I will find a picture and put it in the show notes.
Was Romeo and the old one, was he not played by like Laurence Olivier?
Yeah, there's a Zeffirelli one.
Yeah.
Which
Laurence
was
Olivier has
there's
done
Baz
like
Luhrmann.
every, like before there was Kenneth Branagh, there was Laurence Olivier, who are both like actors who exclusively do like all things Shakespeare. Just fun fact, like Kenneth Branagh is a guy that plays Gilderoy Lockhart in Harry Potter. I'm digressing, but he's so obsessed with Shakespeare, he finds a way to turn everything into Shakespeare, and he directed Thor 2. And I remember watching Thor 2 and like being like, what the heck is this movie? And then I watched the interview of Kenneth Branagh being like, I think it's like Hamlet, really. And I was like, wow, like you just tried to turn Thor 2 into
oh my gosh.
You know, well, sure, Shakespeare was an influence and an inspiration for a lot of things.
Lion King.
Ooh, Lion King.
Confirming
Hamlet.
There was a 19-something version of Romeo and Juliet. I will put it in the show notes. I just sent it to you too.
One?
I just sent it to you on Slack, and it is a side-by-side picture of Zac Efron and the guy who played Romeo.
I think that's the Zeffirelli one.
I just distinctly remember freshman year English, they put on this movie, and we're all like, what's happening right now?
You're like, this is Zac Efron.
Yes.
So Romeo and Juliet is a play that hopefully many of you are familiar with. If you haven't read it in school, hopefully you've seen one of the movies. What it is most frequently remembered for is this epic love story between Romeo and Juliet, which is kind of what this song is going to get into. What the play is really about is two basically children. They are very young teenagers. Juliet, I believe, is 13. And and they fall into a tumultuous love. They're both from two different families that are sworn to hate each other. And because of that, they are described as being star-crossed lovers, fated to be together, but there's obstacles in their way. Namely, their families would never be okay with them actually having some sort of relationship, which honestly, we don't even really get a chance to unfold and play out in the play. Like maybe their parents would have come around, but we don't get a chance because this all happens over 3 days.
Wait, so the Shakespeare Birthplace Trust descriptions of Shakespeare plays have a TLDR, may contain spoilers at the top. And I would just like to read this one for Romeo and Juliet. I will be doing this for all of the ones today, but it says TLDR, may contain spoilers. The classic story of boy meets girl, girl's family hates boy's family hates girl's family, boy kills girl's cousin, boy and girl kill themselves. There you go. That's Romeo and Juliet.
Yeah, we don't get much of the parents, but we do see there is a lot of death and violence between the families, even if it's not from the parents.
Yes.
It's not a love story. Like, despite what Taylor says, and despite the name of the song, not a love story.
I actually want to challenge that because I think there's not enough time. It happens very fast. It is very fleeting. It could have been a love story, maybe.
Yeah, it's like 3 days, right? It's really
short. 3 days. Yeah. And in those 3 days, like Romeo sneaks into Juliet's room. They decide to get married. Like Romeo is banished. It's said like that in a play that I saw. And I love like banished.
The fact that we have like 13-year-olds read this, I guess it's like don't do this, don't try and fall in love in 3 days and run away and get married because everyone will die if you do.
No, so okay, so the point of the play, so now I'm getting to the end. So like it happens very fast, maybe an actual love story. We just don't have enough time to really see it play out. The reason, like what we anchor on, and actually what we do study in school is the irony at the end. It is a tragedy and there's a lot of dramatic irony at the end. There's some timing is just slightly off. They had a plan to drink this poison that would make them be dead. There's a miscommunication. Juliet thinks Romeo is actually dead, ends up stabbing herself, and then Romeo wakes up just as she's dying and then ends up killing himself because he can't believe his love is dead. So it's a tragic ending. You study it for the irony, but the love story, I would argue, is kind of there. It's just sad and very, very short-lived.
People tend to really center on the love between the two of them. And ultimately, I mean, so, tragedies, the hero always has, or heroine has a tragic flaw. And in this story, it's the rushing, it's the urgency that is the tragic flaw. It's everything every decision they make really fast. And that includes falling in love. It includes getting married, and it also includes killing themselves. And so that's the flaw. But I think that this story to me has always had the larger flaw. This isn't a story about Romeo and Juliet, like their love for each other. It's a love versus hate narrative of the hate of the families and the love of the two. And yes, they're young. I mean, put it in its time and place, that wouldn't have seemed as insanely out of place as it does now.
Yeah, there's a line somewhere early on where the nurse or the mother is like, in other places, a 13-year-old, they already have children.
Yeah, but I think the youth does add an element of it's the innocence of youth and it's the grudges of the elderly, so that you can have love. And it's this like, there's supposed to be like that beacon, that moment of hope of these two, despite all odds, despite being raised by hate, despite being raised telling you should hate that other family, they still found love. And I think some reasons that's why West Side Story has become so popular in the world of musicals. I think it tells that message a bit more convincingly for modern audiences. Because you tend to walk away from West Side Story being like, oh, but they found love despite all of this hatred, despite all this rage. And I think it translated a little bit better for modern.
I think it's hard for modern audiences to see why the Montagues and the Capulets hate each other, other than like they're two like families. Whereas West Side Story brings in it's Puerto Rican and Irish. I should know this. Italian.
That's a really good question.
Whereas West Side Story has a more racial perspective that feels, you understand the tensions between the two, but you also are like, wait a second, why it feels unnecessary. Like you realize that the hatred that they have isn't necessary and isn't really founded. So anyway.
Yeah, the one other thing that I want to really quickly point out before we dive into the actual song is that Romeo in Love Story, there's a line was there, you were Romeo, you were throwing pebbles, is kind of like right in the very beginning of the song. And I think this idea of like who is Romeo is interesting too, because to Jen's point, yes, everything is fleeting. The fatal flaw of rushing and just not really thinking through things is especially evident in Romeo, because at the start of the play, Romeo is in love with someone else. He's like super forlorn because he's in love with Rosalind, and he moves on from this one girl to the next within a few lines in this play.
Classic
and
teenage boy.
then it's so dramatic what happens with him and Juliet, and eventually leads to his death, that I think like Juliet, for all of her flaws, is what it is, but like Romeo really is kind of the character here who is rushing things and maybe is the chaotic spirit. So
he's the problem. It's him.
That's how I see it anyways. And I think Leonardo DiCaprio captured that so beautifully, like in his version of the movie and in the modern version. But with that, if we actually jump in, the song opens up with a flashback start standing there on the balcony in summer air. The balcony is a very, very famous reference to the balcony scene in Romeo and Juliet, which is when the two first kind of like declare their love to each other. Romeo is throwing pebbles / climbing up into Juliet's balcony, and there's a really famous monologue in Shakespeare, and also the very famous line, "Romeo, oh Romeo, wherefore art thou?" Romeo comes from there as well.
Do you want to go quickly into the fact that wherefore actually means why? So she's not asking where are you, Romeo? She's saying, why are you, Romeo? Why are you a member of the other family? I think that is not a word that has stayed with the same meaning, and it does change that line quite a bit. It's not a like, Romeo, where are you? It's a Romeo, why are you, Romeo? It's much more tragic.
Act 2, Scene 2, for those who are following along at home.
And this is where we also get into the contemplation of like, what is in a rose? She's contemplating the actual name of Montague and what it means.
'Tis but thy name that is my enemy.
Right, exactly. Because if he had any other name, would it be as much of an issue? Would she even have to think this much about it? Would it be a problem and a controversy? In this song love story, the whole difference between the Capulets and the Montagues, or the families that are fighting, is really summed up in this one line. And my daddy said, "Stay away from Juliet."
Done.
So
this is basically Spark Notes.
The speaker doesn't have the quite as dramatic of forces that are maybe keeping her away from her Romeo in this song, or maybe but it feels that way. And I think this is the point of this song, Love Story, is that it feels like you are faded, like you love this person, but you can't be together because daddy has said, no, stay away, Juliet. Stay away from Juliet. And that's
using
like
Romeo and Juliet to do that means that she doesn't have to go into the details, right? Because
she's dramatizing it by referencing Romeo and Juliet. Like, this is that bad of a situation. But that's where, like, it says you were Romeo, you were throwing pebbles. And we talked earlier about, like, the fact that Romeo is this, like, wishy-washy guy who moves on really quickly. Like, is that the greatest thing to call somebody that you're in love with? Could mean you're romantic. I think romantic is synonymous with Romeo.
And he is quite romantic. Even if he's wishy-washy, when you are the object of his affection, he is quite romantic.
And then he moves on, or he dies.
Yeah. So I
Jody
think,
doesn't believe in love. It's fine.
I just find that this is problematic to think of as, like, it's problematic to think of Romeo and Juliet as, like, the epitome of love.
And that's why I'm like, what are the characteristics? Like, they met, there's a balcony of summer air, there's a party, a ball gown, you make your way through the crowd, they say, like, he says hello, and then he's Romeo.
I wrote down, like, is this a metaphor or is it a retelling? Like, is she using, so I think what you're getting at to me is she using Romeo and Juliet as a metaphor to say this is what this is like for me, which means she doesn't have to then explain more and give more context because we all know the story of Romeo and Juliet? Or is this a retelling of Romeo and Juliet and she's being literal? Like,
I think I definitely see it as a metaphor. I do, because you're skipping through some of the details. And I think by referencing Romeo and Juliet, to your point, like, she doesn't need to go into the detail. I guess my question is that if this is a metaphor, like, what is she saying with this metaphor? Because Romeo, to me, like, all I could really get was like, this is incredibly romantic guy that I have a very deep connection with.
I think something that, if we get really more into the story, Romeo does do the pursuing. He sees her and he's like, this is it. I have found true love.
Forget Rosalind. It's this one now.
Exactly. And there's definitely problems with it, but I think that, to me, in this song, when we compare it to Romeo and Juliet, Romeo is, again, pursuing her, that she's is the one throwing the pebbles and all that stuff. But then I think where it gets interesting is we get that. We get the pursuing, we get the romance, but then the story does break. There's a couple of, and I'm like, sure, we can get into it now, I guess, if we want, but it is interesting to me that Romeo begging you, please don't go, so Romeo does leave, Romeo does listen, and that is not what happens really in the play.
When Romeo is banished, I think there's a moment, banished, yes, when Juliet just wants to go with him at that time. She thinks that something awful will happen if they are separated, and he's like, no, just trust me, this will be fine. They work out the plan with the friar. I'm sorry, I don't have the name.
Yeah.
Friar Lawrence. And I think there is a moment where Juliet is like, I think we should stay together. Like, don't go and leave. But Romeo is like, this will be fine. Trust me, we've got a plan.
I got this, girl. Trust me.
Got this. It'll all be great. And I think maybe that's where the please don't go is coming from. But yeah, I do think that, I think the line, 'cause you were Romeo, is repeated a few times. And to me, it's just like, what does that mean? Like in pop culture, and I think today it means like a really amazing guy. Like you were the one, perhaps.
You were the person I was fated to be with. I see it as maybe not
very destiny, fate.
Destiny, fate. It's less about the character of Romeo, which is highly problematic in my unprofessional opinion, and more about the idea of this is a the star-crossed lovers.
You're the Romeo to my Juliet.
To my Juliet, that despite all odds, we were meant to be together. And I think that that's what she's trying to say, because she has this whole, he's being told to stay away, but they are fated to be together. And so this whole song is Juliet saying like, come on, take me somewhere we can be alone. You're this is a love story. We're meant to be together.
Yeah, so now let's get into where the song kind of takes a turn a little bit. They're talking about running away. There's a really interesting line about you'll be the prince and I'll be the princess. Like, I have no idea where that comes from. It's not related to Shakespeare.
Yeah, but I think that when we think of Romeo and Juliet, I think of it as like when you think of romantic fantasy, you think of Romeo and Juliet, it's Prince Charming. Like she's
listing out more pairs, and we're gonna deep dive this one later.
I was just gonna say.
So I think it's more appropriate for like a deep dive, but it's not related to Shakespeare per se, because there's no prince and princesses in this story.
She brings in other elements, which we will discuss next week.
We will discuss. We will deep dive.
Yeah. And they run.
They run away.
I think what's interesting here is that the ending is very different from the play. And that's worth talking through, because in the play, of course, when they run away, there is a miscommunication, and that's when the actual tragedy happened. It doesn't work out. Like in Romeo and Juliet, the love is not successful. In this situation, her faith in him is fading. She's waiting. She goes through this. Is this in my head? I don't know what to think. But he is there. He has a ring. He says, marry me. Also, he talked to her dad, and her dad said yes.
Her dad said yes. He changed his mind.
That seems super key, because that's the rushing thing too. In the play, they rush to get married because there's nothing they can do about it.
No one will let them be together. And now
this is a fixing of that fatal flaw where Romeo was like, pause, I'm going to go resolve this conflict.
See, to me, it felt like a lie. It feels like something that Romeo's just saying to be like, no, it's cool. I got your dad's permission. Go pick out a dress.
There is a sense of like she was waiting for a hot minute. Like she got tired of waiting. She didn't know if he was going to come around. So some time has passed here. And to Jen's point, like if we're not as rushed of a timeline perhaps as in the play. And so this is where there's a twist. I also think it's really fun musically in this song that there's a twist, because Taylor almost plays on the fact that we're expecting something else. Like there's a buildup, like you have the whole setup. And I remember when this song came out, everybody was obsessed. I mean, to this day, I think the thing that people love about the song is like the bridge, the key change, the big like beat drop. The big beat drop.
Which is also the only time Romeo speaks. Everything else is from Juliet's perspective. They're the person who's relating themselves to Juliet. You only see Romeo's perspective when he says at the very end, marry me, Juliet, at the key change.
And I just think it's really clever that she used that moment to twist a really classic story that maybe everyone would have been familiar with, because you think you know what's happening, and then wait, like the ending is totally different. And she rewrites the ending, and it's almost like a gleeful moment, like the way that she sings it. Everybody's always jumping up and down at this part. It's a victory. It's a happy ending. It's not the tragedy. And I think that is like her rewriting of the Shakespeare play. Like she's acknowledging, I think the contrast is so dramatic because she expects you to know that it's like could have gone very bad, and it doesn't.
Yeah, this could have been a tragic ending, but now it like Romeo and Juliet, but instead it's a love story. So
yeah, it's definitely a song that, two thoughts. One, if it comes up when I'm like listening on a playlist, it's not one that I'm always like, yes, I'm ready for this song. But man, at the Eras tour, I was like,
yeah, we were all
when
ready.
you're with everyone else and you hit that moment, you're just like, yeah, love is real.
Marry me, Julia.
And it's in the right way. Like Dad said yes. Like it's not us
I got
fighting.
permission.
Yeah. Well, it's not even I think you could read it with some permission stuff, which, you know, again, not everyone feels that strongly about it, but it's even there was a conflict between our families and it's been resolved. And that's like that
happy
from
ending,
the story itself is where that happy ending could have happened. But it's also funny to me that I'm actually certain now, if I went back and was teaching high school again, that I would have students who thought this was the ending to Romeo and Juliet because they probably heard the song growing up before ever reading the play, which is funny to me.
Instead of reading the play, they're like, no, I know what happens. I listened to Love Story, and it's like,
you're like, no.
No, not it.
Oh, that's true.
Sorry.
We're the last generation to understand the difference. I don't know.
Taylor rewrote Shakespeare. Only Taylor. Like, only Taylor could do.
I mean, it's in the title and it's in the chorus. It's a love story. Just say yes. I just... Romeo and Juliet, if you take away nothing, Romeo and Juliet could be a love story, but it's first and foremost a tragedy and a very fleeting love story. But in the song, she's like, it's a love story.
It's a love story. This is my time to mention & Juliet, which is a musical currently on Broadway, where it is also a retelling of Romeo and Juliet if Juliet did not kill herself upon seeing Romeo presumably dead. So I like reading or listening to Love Story as a retelling of Romeo and Juliet, just like & Juliet is a feminist retelling of Romeo and Juliet.
In case you're into Bollywood, there's also an amazing Bollywood retelling of Romeo and Juliet called Ram Leela, which is like the most fantastic like version in a different culture that I have seen.
Oh, I want to see that.
The irony
that sounds
is
awesome.
all there. Beautiful sets, amazing music. The two actors that are in this movie ended up getting married in real life. Like this movie is where they met and fell in love.
Stop
it. I love that.
It's just
incredible. That's a love story.
Yeah, baby, just say yes.
But they really capture all of the dramatic irony in a different way. Like the director takes some creative liberties, but like it's all the same emotions, which I love that if you can capture like that same irony in a different way.
I love it.
To make it relatable. Anyways, with that, let's move on to our next song.
I have our next song. This episode's going to be 4 hours because we are like just getting started. And I know we have so much to say about this. So I am pairing Bad Blood with the play Julius Caesar.
I'm so excited.
So much to say here. But let's get the important legal things out of the way first. It was Bad Blood was written by Taylor Swift, Max Martin, and Shellback. It came out on 19 and again in 2023 on Taylor's version. And it's track number 8. And then Julius Caesar. We'll get into some of the details. One of the reasons I actually chose this one, this pairing works really well and it's going to be fun to discuss. But also, even if you've never seen the play Julius Caesar, you probably know the story. Julius Caesar is coming into his own. He's getting very powerful. And then he is assassinated by many of his essentially colleagues and friends. And it is the story of that. It focuses primarily on Brutus as the protagonist, who is someone who truly loves Caesar, but he has a famous line of, yes, I love Caesar, but I love Rome more, where the bettering of his people, of his society is more important than his love of one man who he does genuinely love and admire, but he's too much of a risk. He's too much of a threat. So he does help kill him.
Can I give the Shakespeare's description, which are my new favorite synopses? TLDR may contain spoilers. Julius Caesar is warned of the Ides of March, ignores it, and dies. Plebeians are way too easily swayed. All the conspirators die too.
Yes,
I love
correct.
it.
Also, we'll put a link to this in the show notes, but the Folger Shakespeare Library, the website has all the plays and they are also searchable. So that's also kind of nice. You can access those for free and you can easily search them too if you would like to access any of those. But one of the reasons I really chose this, immediately a connection came to mind. And it was, I think we talk about Romeo, wherefore art thou Romeo, really famous line. I think another one of the most famous Shakespeare lines is the Et tu, Brute. It just comes up so much in pop culture as this moment of betrayal.
Was Shakespeare, thought it was like what Caesar actually said as he died. So
yeah. And it's
I
this
also
moment
had this revelation, which is hilarious.
That's so funny. Yeah. So it's this moment of, it's really heartbreaking actually, because Brutus and Caesar are genuinely good friends. They do seem to genuinely love each other. Yet Brutus is making this choice for kind of noble reasons. You can disagree with it, but like he is very much
thinks it's noble reasons. He thinks this is the right choice.
And no one really disagrees with that. Even at the very end of the play, when everyone's done, spoiler to tragedy, everyone dies. Antony, who is the one who kind of who is the supporter of Caesar, Antony gives this beautiful speech about Brutus was the only conspirator who had the right thing to do. He was an honorable man. Like even in all of this, everyone still is like, no, but Brutus is a good dude. Like no one ever disagrees with that.
He's a good dude, but isn't the whole crux of the play also questioning whether an undemocratic act is a means to ensuring democracy? So the undemocratic act of assassinating somebody, is that really the way to preserve?
Yeah. This is where I was also confused because I felt like Antony also was the one that like pointed the fingers at Brutus and Cassius initially and said like, no, they like this was not right.
Well, let's actually get into the song because there's some stuff in the song that I think can help with this.
I was curious when you say like bad blood, like which bad blood?
Yeah, I wrote. Like, I had a whole journey of who I thought the perspective was.
Yeah, so I really analyzed this song from Caesar's point of view because Caesar does come back as a ghost in the second part of the show. And I view it as Caesar is the speaker of this, but it's to Brutus. So in a lot of ways, my analysis was like, this is what Brutus was kind of hearing. So also there's some very literal things. You made a really deep cut.
Can you do the details? Did we do the details of what album this is from yet?
Yep, I did do that.
I'm clearly blacked out. Cool, great.
You're just so excited about Shakespeare. But it was made a really deep cut, scars my back, they stabbed Caesar. So that was very literally there. It's this idea of betrayal. But the thing that there is like some political commentary here, but I really was struck that this play is really almost this like psychological deep dive into Brutus where I never walked away feeling like he did the wrong thing, but it doesn't mean it was consequence free. That was what I really felt like this viewing of it. So you can see the Globe if you pay. They have some streaming versions of it. So I watched, yes, and Jody also watched. There's a 20th version that they did at the Globe. So I watched that.
Where Mark Antony is played by Luke Thompson, who is Benedict from Bridgerton.
Yes.
So if you needed more reason to watch, I'm like watching this thing and I was like, why does Mark Antony look so familiar? And then I looked it up and I was like, that's why, because I just binge watched Bridgerton.
Well, in so many of Shakespeare's tragedies, if you think about like King Lear, Hamlet, Othello, Macbeth, you kind of look at the main person and you're like, you made a really stupid decision or you made it for really bad reasons. King Lear in particular, go watch King Lear. If you are a fan of King Lear or if you're a fan of just tragedies, oh my goodness. Emily St. John Mandel, Station 11 is kind of a retelling of King Lear and it's really good. So I highly recommend that. But
well, I mean, we just talked about Romeo and Juliet. We're like, dude, Romeo, like, what are you doing? Like,
what are you doing, Romeo?
But I think that's what makes Julius Caesar an interesting one because it is a tragedy, but it's also a historical play. So it's kind of walking these two roads here.
And Julius Caesar's barely in it. Like,
Julius Caesar's barely in it.
Julius Caesar, and he's barely in it. And so that's where when you're talking about like, did Brutus do the right thing? The thing I struggle with is you only hear about Julius Caesar. You hear more about what Julius Caesar did through other people, through rumors, through conversations, but you don't really get to witness it that much. Even the whole conversation about he wouldn't take the crown, he refused it 3 times, that's not something we ever see. So there's this element of, you kind of just have to trust what you're hearing, but there's that specific scene where there's 2 different letters and there's like different accounts of how many people died. So I got this sense the whole time where like, I understand that Brutus feels like this is the thing he needs to do, that Caesar's too powerful, but you never really see Caesar acting the way that Brutus is saying. And so it's hard to really say, is Brutus justified in his actions?
Yeah, I think that's where the fact that it's also a history play comes in.
Yes, that we have the context.
they don't need to know a ton about Julius Caesar, but
That's
these
fair.
characters of Brutus and these other characters are newer, so you get more of them. And I also think too, and I know you have a story to share, Jody, so I'm going to tee you up, so be prepared. I think we get it some today, but especially in a time of monarchs, the idea of a tyrant was well known. It did not need to be explained, but the idea of the fear of a tyrant is pretty understood. And I mean, these are people who maybe probably still had Henry VIII and some of the kind of trauma of, he had some really great things he did and some really bad things he did. But then you have Bloody Mary also very recently in memory. So these are, the original audience would have had known figures in mind of like, we don't want a tyrant. And so
that's a really
for
good point.
modern audiences, so the Public Theater in New York did Julius Caesar at Central Park, and they had a Trump-like figure playing Julius Caesar.
I was just gonna say, like, reading this in 2024 election year is weird.
I have a great book for you. Shakespeare in a Divided America, written by James Shapiro, who is a Shakespeare scholar, professor at Columbia, and I actually took his class when I was an undergrad. And it's a really fabulous book. It goes through different periods in American history and relating to different plays. So, for example, like Abraham Lincoln and his love of Macbeth, but also what's the guy?
It's Booth.
Booth. No, wasn't it the Booth Theater?
Wilkes Booth.
John Wilkes Booth.
Abraham Lincoln loved Macbeth. So did John Wilkes Booth, who murdered him. So you get that angle. Anyway, the book is great. He has a whole chapter devoted to modern America and how modern audiences perceive and read Julius Caesar with the specific lens of this public theater show where they use Trump as the perception of Julius. And I had that in mind. So I had never read Julius Caesar or watched it until preparing for this. I knew about the public theater performance. So I knew, obviously I have the history of who Julius Caesar is. I knew that, he was being related to a Trump-like character. But again, watching the play, I'm like, you don't see that he's that bad. So it really does require that context. And I would imagine, again, the book talks about the controversy a Trump-like figure plays Caesar because we are such a divided country.
In one of the
Antony
monologues,
loves Caesar.
I was just going to say, in one of the monologues, I do believe that Antony says, like, yes, Caesar had become kind of like this dictator, whatever, but he did love Rome. Everything he did was for Rome, and he loves the people he was going to leave. Like, I think when he dies,
he left it in the will.
He leaves
left
everything
money
behind for the people.
Yeah.
And so you get the sense that there's a little bit of a blurry line here of...
Well, it goes back to, you've got the side that loves democracy and thinks it's working and wants to keep it working, and the side that thinks democracy isn't working. In America, the side that thinks democracy is broken, and
I was reminded of FDR, who stayed in office for 4 terms, eventually ended up dying, but it's like one of those moments where he was very beloved by everyone in the country. Great leader, had done some amazing things for the country. It was ushered America into the golden age of America, but then is breaking the tradition of the 2 terms that was set by George Washington. And then you're like, okay, how does this democracy continue? Should this person stay in power forever?
What ends justify what means? And in order to maintain a democracy, despite people, I saw Here Lies Love recently, which is a telling of the Marcoses of the Philippines. And so that's another, that was a tyrannical rule as well, but also early on, beloved. And so you have this idea of, you have these figures who have this cult of personality, who really have just that people love them and adore them because they feel they're talking directly to them and their pains. But where does it flip? Where does the switch flip to the selfishness and their self-interest? And now it's not about the democracy and the people, it's about them and power. Anyway, Bad Blood, Taylor Swift, right?
Yeah, I was gonna say. So I think one of the reasons I focus so hard on Brutus's character and Brutus's process, one, he was a really eloquent leader, and apparently that works for me. So I was
gonna say, because you were attracted to him.
It's fine. It's not a big deal. I have super normal celebrity crushes. This was a whole thing. Anyways, but 2, I really felt like this song kind of dug into that. So this idea of, he agree or disagree with him, he thought he was doing the right thing, and even his enemies still said, I disagreed with what he did, but he was still a person who was very firm on what he believed in. He is not like, there are other people who are, you know, part of this assassination who are kind of like depicted as sort of not great people or doing this for selfish reasons. Even if you don't agree with it, he did not do it for selfish reasons.
Right.
That is,
he did it for the country, for the good of Rome.
He was not doing this to get power for himself, and he both says that and he both follows through in his actions. He never tries to take power.
Well, and Mark Antony keeps calling him an honorable man. He keeps calling the people who assassinated Caesar honorable, which I was like, does he believe that?
I mean, I think this is a whole other conversation. I think when Antony's doing that to the people, he's making sure he's playing politics very, very effectively. Where he's saying like, oh, I'm not, you guys, because everyone loves Brutus. So he's making sure he's like, I'm not saying Brutus is a bad person, but I'm saying this was a bad thing. But I'm not saying he was a bad person. He's playing politics really, really well in that moment of being like, no, I would never insult him. But like, should he have killed Caesar? Maybe no. But like, he's a super good dude. But like, also
he's a good dude, but like Caesar was a good dude, and look at all the things he did for you and left for you.
I mean, in the song, just to tie it back, also there's the line of like, did you think it all through? These things will catch up to you. And to me, this is like one of those like actions have consequences kind of moments. It's like,
that's exactly what I was going for here.
I saw this song as like, I thought it could either be Caesar from the grave or Mark Antony. Like I could also see Mark Antony singing this. Also, again, because he's the Bridgerton guy, I was like, I would like to see him singing this. I think that this to me was the song that happens right after Caesar is murdered, and either the ghost comes back earlier and sings this, or it's Mark Antony when he like discovers that Caesar's dead.
So I kind of viewed it,
Julius Caesar the musical is what we just did.
kind of viewed it as covering the whole second half. So a couple of lines that kind of tell the story. You know, it used to be mad love. They did truly love each other, but now we got problems, and I don't think we can solve them. You made a really deep cut, and there's in this, you know, in the song can be very metaphorical of like a deep cut is like a moment where someone says something hard, says some sort of betrayal. Obviously in the show it is quite literally a deep cut with a knife, but it still captures this moment of a point of no return. This relationship is not coming back from it. It's a metaphorical cut or literal, obviously it's not coming back. And then there's all this stuff about like, did you have to do this? I was thinking you could be trusted. Caesar really did trust Brutus. He did really like believe in him. But then we go down, and so don't think it's in the past. These kinds of wounds, they last and they last. And that's where also literally
you're dead.
Like that you live with ghosts. So those were the lines that really got me of like, he really lives with it. And something that was really cool in the Globe version I watched, which I don't think is done universally, but at the end of the show, Brutus ultimately kills himself because he realizes they've lost. And he also very much he feels the weight of his actions. I think more so than some of the other conspirators. He still believes he did the right thing, but he is burdened with the fact that he did kill his friends. And so when he goes to kill himself, he asks someone to hold the sword so that he can run himself into it, which was, it's like a thing. And that was like how everyone was doing it in the play. So it was like, I think an honorable Roman way to die to make sure you weren't captured. And in the Globe version, it's one of his men who agrees to hold the sword for him, and that can be anyone, but in this version it was the same actor who played Caesar who holds the sword. And it does seem like Brutus recognizes it. There's no lines about this, so this was definitely an interpretation by the Globe, but I really liked it. I viewed that moment as it wasn't actually Caesar's ghost, but in that moment Brutus was seeing
that's
Caesar
what he was thinking
as the one that was stabbing
and
the
the
knife.
whole audience. What I like about watching the Globe versions is like you see the audience, and you can
like a gasp, I think.
Yeah, there was a gasp when people saw who it was, and I would like, I will be clear, like I knew it wasn't Caesar, but it was unclear to me if that person was playing someone on Brutus's side or against Brutus. So thank you for clarifying that for me, Jen. But I think that was a really interesting choice to make.
Almost like the memory of Caesar is
of all the things you did to this person. All those things will catch up to you.
Because it says you live with ghosts, and the ghost of Caesar does visit Brutus and say, I will see you on the battlefield. And so the fact that they chose to have the actor playing Caesar means that you see that Brutus is seeing him, and Brutus's dying words are, Caesar, now be still. I killed not thee with half so good a will. So his dying words is he's like a goal.
Sorry.
Like, I have to have the consequences for the decision I made. He doesn't regret it, but there was bad blood. He like these kinds of wounds, they last and they last. All these things will catch up to you and time can heal, but this won't. Like all of those lines, I like as I was watching was just like this is kind of And from this point of view, this song to me is very much a warning of saying you did what you did, but there's consequences for betrayal. Like even if you think you did the right thing, even if it was a miscommunication, there are consequences for your actions. And that is what Brutus feels in the whole second half of the play is.
Are the consequences of his actions.
There are consequences and he has to work through them. His wife, who he loves, dies.
Yeah, why'd she die? I missed that.
Dies.
It's just like, Portia's dead. And I'm like,
oh dang, I think there was like miscommunication or something.
I felt like it was a very Romeo and Juliet like moment where it was like she hears of somebody's death and then
I think there was a miscommunication, like, and then she swallows hot coals is how she kills herself, which is horrifying.
Fire. She died by fire.
Yeah,
that I remember. But I was like, but why?
Yeah, I'm pulling it up right now. But he loses everything. Like he stands by his decision. He thinks he did the right thing, but he loses everything. And his final moment is the ghosts are there. There's consequences for his actions. And, you know.
I actually do like the interpretation of like, I mean, it definitely makes sense that it's the second part of the play. I think I like the interpretation that it might be like a Mark Antony being the speaker, but to Brutus and saying like, we have bad blood now because you went and did this to Caesar. You live with ghosts. You're living with the ghosts of Caesar.
That's where I was gonna go until he killed himself using the actor who looked like Caesar. And then I was like, this feels very internally in his head. If Antony had killed him, I think I would have felt differently, but the way that it ended was so specifically Brutus made the choice.
So my full journey was, because again, I had never seen the show, but I knew that you were relating to Bad Blood. So I literally wrote down, first thought was that it was Cassius's point of view, because Cassius is the one initially who's like, something's wrong with Caesar, he's got too much power, but it doesn't quite work. Then when Caesar was killed, again, I didn't see this show, so I was like, oh, maybe it's Caesar, but like as if he's coming back from the grave, not knowing that Caesar actually comes back from the grave. So I'm good. Shakespeare and I, Willie, we're on the same page.
Shakespeare loves his ghosts.
I know, he loves ghosts. Then when I saw Mark Antony's point of view and him get really angry, I was like, oh, this is really good from Mark Antony's point of view because of the anger. He really, like, Caesar's ghost even doesn't have the anger. We don't see Caesar feel the pain and the anguish, but we do see Mark Antony be totally enraged, and that this song to me has a lot of rage and anger I don't see Caesar having.
There's a power void. When Caesar is killed, there's a power void. And it is like, well, who becomes the next leader? And Mark Antony is definitely gunning up to be the next leader. And I think if we think through, like, why is Mark Antony so set on, like, there must be justice, like, democracy must transfer in the right way, or, like, the people still broke democracy. I think he has to see all of the senators that were conspirators as potential threats for the next leader. It's like, well, you can't just come and take over the throne by force, and there's a power void here, and this is a person who is thinking about the next power era in which presumably he is in charge.
It's the era.
Well, and so it is kind of like, who are the real enemies now? It's like, yes, Brutus and Caesar were really, really good friends. They were all presumably friends, like Brutus, Antony, and we're all on the same side. And now Antony is now seeing Brutus as a threat because he's like, you're dangerous. You just killed a leader.
I totally hear you. The way it ends, though, I felt anger from Antony to all the conspirators except Brutus. I didn't feel rage from him to Brutus specifically. He even says his final end is, he says Brutus is dead, and he's saying this to Octavius. There's no need for him to play politics here. He simply says to his men, this was the noblest Roman of them all. All the conspirators, save only he, did that they did in envy of great Caesar. He only, in a general honest thought and common good to all, made one of them. His life was gentle, and the elements so mixed in him that nature might stand up and say to all the world, this was a man. And I just don't see anger in that.
Yeah, but I think that's why I don't see as much anger in Bad Blood as I know Bad Blood is an angry song, but I also see it as like an unfortunate, like, now we have problems and I don't think we can solve them. Like a thing of like, this has happened. You made a dumb decision. You made a really deep cut, and now we've got Bad Blood. I don't remember like exactly who the song was written about. That we have two theories. We don't have to go into the actual Taylor lore of it, but I think depending on like who you think this song was about when it came out, also, like, I think that there's like a version of thinking of this as just like, I didn't want this to be a bad relationship. We have just ended up here because you keep doing really dumb things and now we have bad blood and we have to hate each other. And I just don't know how we can fix these problems. And if you take the kind of like helpless, like it is what it is kind of view, then like maybe it's more acceptable.
No, all I know is that I can't listen to Bad Blood the same way anymore. And I would like a musical version of Julius Caesar.
That would be very interesting.
I do think that this song is perfect for the whole play because to the very point, I think like all of the characters can have their own chorus.
Oh, yeah. Genius. I love that idea. Yeah, I think even the Romans, the last one I wrote down was, oh, is this the Romans? Because at the end they are angry. They are like, oh no, what did you do? So I love that idea. One of those songs where each person can sing it because it resonates with them, but for different reasons. Chef's Kiss. That was brilliant, Monty. And Jen for coming up with this connection.
Yeah, I think I'll try to find a book or two to recommend. I actually took a class on Julius Caesar in college, and there's a lot more. Class. It was really interesting, and it's one of those things where, again, in the time when this came out, people would have known a lot about this story. There's a lot of additional context that Shakespeare didn't need to include because people would have known. And so there's some other things here of like the fact that Caesar was part of, we have the first triumvirate, we have the second triumvirate. There's all of these like, and how Rome's democracy worked and all of that stuff that even though we don't see a lot of Caesar, we do know now he fundamentally changed Rome. It did moved away from democracy after this. But as a side note, one of my favorite things about the play, I don't think this would be Antony singing to Octavius, but there were definitely moments where Antony just seems annoyed with Octavius, where he's like, I guess you're the new Caesar. Cool. You are not the best. And Octavius kind of seems like he sucks. So, there's definitely, most tragedies end with like some small moment of hope where someone survives. Like you get that, like, I think the implication of Romeo and Juliet is that like they start learning their lessons about hatred because they have both families have lost someone. And so this show, you end with Mark Antony and Octavius Caesar. And it's not the most hopeful thing historically, we know, which is why I think I just so obviously very strongly believe that Brutus was not considered the villain of the story because it ends with this honoring of a good man and to say all the world this was a man and then Octavius says some more good things about him. That the moment of hope I think in this show is not that the right people survived, it's that there was a good man, that there was someone who was so solidly cared about Rome that there will be others. I think that's the moment of hope in the show. So that was the only thing I wanted to say because it's a historical play and a tragedy, so it means it's kind of interesting. But we get to get into a fun one for the last one. Yes. Jody picked my favorite play, so I'm very excited for this.
So we had a tragedy, a history, and now it's time for a comedy. I picked Midsummer Night's Dream, and my favorite synopsis from the Shakespeare Birth Trust, TLDR, may contain spoilers, people get lost in the woods, Puck manipulates their romantic affections, and in one case, anatomical head shape, and they put on a play. The bigger description is that 4 Athenians run into the forest only to have Puck, the fairy, make both of the boys fall in love with the same girl. The 4 run through the forest pursuing each other while Puck helps his master play a trick on the fairy queen, and in the end Puck reverses the magic and the 2 couples reconcile and marry. And so antics ensue. There's like 5 different storylines happening at once.
So much going on.
Yeah, there's like a lot.
Amazing.
It's really incredible. I'm relating this to Cruel Summer. So Cruel Summer came out on Lover in 2019. This is track 2, Taylor Swift, our boy Jack Antonoff, and Anne Clark. And I was like, who is Anne Clark? It's St. Vincent, who I think just works with Jack Antonoff a lot. So I highly recommend, if you haven't read the play. I actually have never read the play. I've seen it. I saw it at the Globe.
It has a lot of physical comedy too, which is makes it really funny to see.
It's really
funny to read.
Yeah, I read it and it has a lot of characters. And so I think the first thing is to just like get grounded in characters and everything. But it's a very easy read because I think like most of Shakespeare's comedies, he's funny. Like he's a funny writer. And so if you're reading it like a play or like how it would be delivered, like it is actually quite an entertaining read. It really
is. So initially, again, I'll give you a little bit of background into how I make this choice. I mean, I watched multiple things. I watched Macbeth. I watched Much Ado About Nothing, that's my favorite play. So I really wanted something to work there, but I couldn't find a good song for Beatrice and Benedict. So I moved on. I moved on to the 19 film version of A Midsummer Night's Dream, directed by Michael Hoffman, starring Michelle Pfeiffer and Stanley Tucci as Puck. And let me tell you, Stanley Tucci as Puck
is incredible.
Like the best casting I have ever seen in my entire life.
10 out of 10 casting.
Yeah, there's more. There's more fabulous people. Those are just...
This is the version we watched in college for this movie.
So good. Anyway, okay, so Cruel Summer. Initially, I was like, okay, well, Midsummer Night's Dream, Cruel Summer, Midsummer Night's Dream, Cruel Summer. They both have summer in the title. Let's see what happens. And then as I was watching the play, the character that stood out to me as resonating with this song is Helena. So Helena is a woman, she's played by Callista Flockhart in the movie version that I saw, so you can just kind of like figure out who she is. She is in love with Demetrius, this guy who just does not love her. He loves Hermia, lots of love triangles and squares.
Chaos, which is why I love it. It's my favorite.
It's chaos. So chaotic. The whole play is chaotic. So Helena loves Demetrius. Demetrius loves Hermia. Hermia loves Lysander. And Helena is like in agony the whole time. Right? Oh, I think love quadrangle. Helena is like in agony this whole play, like, because she is so upset that Demetrius doesn't love her. And then in the forest, Puck puts the little, venom, not venom.
Is it like fairy dust? It's like fairy a flower dust.
Magic.
He mistakes. He's supposed to give the fairy dust to Demetrius to make him love Helena. Instead, he accidentally does it to Lysander, and then Lysander falls in love with Helena. And then at one point, they both fall in love with Helena, but Helena doesn't believe it. She's like, "You're making fun of me. Stop making fun of me." Anyway, so there's a lot of unrequited love and also pain and agony from Helena's perspective. And if you think about this song, so cruel, I always go back to some definitions. So cruel means willfully causing pain. A cruel summer, the idea of a cruel summer is a love you're yearning for that causes pain. So whether that love is unrequited or, it's forbidden, there could be many reasons. The song Cruel Summer is about this unrequited love, or love that causes pain, and Helena's love for Demetrius just causes all this pain and agony. Okay, and then we get into the very first line. Fever dream high in the quiet of the night. Literally all of A Midsummer Night's Dream is a fever dream.
I was gonna say, this was sort of a Cornelia Street moment for me, where, okay, I see the name title, but how does the story of the song work? Which I like the connection where you're going with, but then I read Fever Dream High, and I was like, no, all right,
done.
That's it.
Done. That is literally the entire play.
Yes.
So you've got that. And then you have this idea. So again, I said Helena is always like, oh my God, he doesn't love me. But he loves Hermia. And so in Act 1, Scene 1, Hermia says, I frown. This is Hermia and then Helena. So the first line is Hermia. I frown upon him, yet he loves me still. And Helena, oh, that your frowns would teach my smiles such skill. Hermia, I give him curses, yet he gives me love. Helena, oh, that my prayers could such affection move. Hermia, the more I hate, the more he follows me. The more I love, the more he hateth me. So there's just nothing she can do. And then killing me slow out the window, always waiting for you just to be waiting below. She's always waiting for Demetrius to it's killing her, but she's always waiting for him to love her. And then you have at the very end of, the bridge, which we love, I love you, ain't that the worst thing you ever heard? Literally that's what she is saying the whole time. I love you, ain't that the worst thing you ever heard? And he's like, yeah, I don't love you.
I also bookmarked this particular excerpt that you just read out when I was reading, because I also was just thinking of the devils roll the dice, angels roll their eyes. What doesn't kill me makes you want you more. It's just
literally her.
It's stupid boys won't leave me alone. It just felt like was a really fun.
It's blue, the feeling I've got. Helena is blue throughout this whole thing. And then said I'm fine, but it wasn't true. And I snuck in through the garden gate every night that summer just to seal my fate. The antics of the play take place as Hermia and Lysander escape into the woods, and Helena sneaks in and follows them, and also tells Demetrius that he will follow Hermia.
I like the Helena perspective. I don't think I would have caught that initially. I think it's a good one. It's a good perspective on just somebody watching this whole madness and being like, this is not going the way I wanted it to go. My initial thought when I started reading this play was the folklore love triangle of
that's a good one too.
Betty, Augustine, and whatever this random guy is.
Augustine? Is that the name?
I think it's the name that
people have given her.
Yes.
Because of August. Yeah. Well, I think Taylor
Betty,
said
James,
it.
And Inez.
I think in the Pond Studio sessions, Taylor said that was the name she had been using. Aaron Dessner was like, what?
Yeah. Cool. Great.
But just the little love triangle-y, everybody loves somebody and then it's unrequited. But I do really like the Helena perspective as well with this song, because I think that can apply.
I had the incredible fortune to see this at the Globe
last
summer.
And, mine was 2000.
Oh no, this was a very recent experience, and I went with a friend who is not really a big Shakespeare person, and he said this was like his favorite thing we did in London because it's that good of a show.
It's
but
so good.
It's so fun to read too, but I think it has, I'm going to say the word that Jody wants us to stop using, but the vibes of the song and the vibes of the show.
The vibes?
When you hear Cruel Summer, you're kind of bouncing around and you're just like having fun, and things are like, the song itself also feels a little bit chaotic at times because it's kind of a like, it's the worst thing I ever heard, but the music is like upbeat. And this show is just, it's just fun. Like,
it's fun.
You are just
but the characters
laughing.
are in agony. The characters are, you've got Helena not like going after Demetrius because he doesn't love her. And then even when he and Lysander do love her, she's like, you're making fun of me. And then when Lysander likes Helena because of the spell, she's like, oh my God. Hermia's like, oh my God, like, what about me? And then you have Titania falls in love with a donkey because of the spell. Like, there is chaos. This whole show is chaos, yet it's a comedy. Like, there is anger and fear and like hurt of these characters, yet it's a comedy.
Absurd.
Similarly with Cruel Summer, it is a bop, it is pop music, and this song is very anxious. This song is about, again, we're not deep diving this one when one day we will. Is it unrequited love? Is it just forbidden love? I get that sense when it's like, I snuck in through the garden gate every night that summer just to steal my fate. There's an element of like, this is forbidden. But anyway, like, there's something in their song where there's anxiety and fear, but it's a bop. It is a pop song. And so again, Shakespeare, Taylor Swift.
Even when when there's high emotion in Cruel Summer, it also starts with I'm drunk in the back of the car. So you're like high and on something. Like I
thought everybody was drunk. Yeah, they're on something. I thought everybody was drunk in the show, but they're just like on pixie dust.
So it's like,
they're not sober for sure.
They're not sober.
So it's like, like she's really upset and miserable and crying, but like also like how many of us have just like sobbed our hearts out when you're drunk, and it's not like you're not like the emotions are not.
I did it like 2 months ago. It's fine.
It's sad, but it's not like real sad. It's like drunk sad.
It's drunk sad.
Well, and the difference, if you think about, so watching Julius Caesar, there are some really funny moments in Julius Caesar. There's like some very clever turns of phrases, and there's very serious and sad moments in Midsummer's Night Dream. But the difference is the emotions that you kind of sit with in the shows, and in the comedy, you don't sit in that sadness or the intensity for too long. You get the reprieve, you get the plot moving forward, and usually in a tragedy, you kind of sit in it for a little bit longer. You feel the tragedy of it longer.
Like, and so, you don't leave Romeo and Juliet in a good mood. Like, you leave being like, what have I just watched?
What just happened?
Yeah.
And why are we teaching this to teenagers?
Well, the purpose of a tragedy, I may have said this before, is catharsis. The idea of a tragedy is for you to feel the full range of intense emotion projected on the show. And so you're not supposed to leave feeling happy, but you're supposed to leave feeling kind of emotionally cleansed of like, I have gone through something and I have felt my feelings and now I feel a bit cleansed. But you leave a comedy very just upbeat, like that was a really fun time. That was a really good time. And they also both, I've said this before, but this is always true. All big stories are some way trying to tell you what is good, what is evil, what is right about the world, how things should be. And so a tragedy, you end with things aren't the way they should be, and there's a moment of hope. Comedies tend to end with things the way they should be. The right people are in love with the right people. Everything's resolved. So you get that conclusion. You get that closure more so in a comedy.
Yeah, and I wouldn't go so far as to say that Cruel Summer is necessarily a comedy, but I will say that in terms of like the devastating songs that Taylor writes, I also would not really call it a tragedy. I think it's a
there's
sad
still
song.
love here. There's still love here.
I think it's an intense amount of emotions, but it's more of like the intensity, and like it's one of those songs where you're like, you're talking about some heartbreak and upset, but again, she caveats that by saying like, I'm drunk when this was happening. Like, this was a bad summer, but
I cried like a baby, which is like not like a catharsis. It's like okay, you're being a baby.
It's not like an all too well kind of song. You know, like this is a very different kind of.
All too well is fall.
Even musically though, I'm drunk in the back of the car. It's very bouncy. It's I'm drunk in the back of the car.
Yeah. And I cried like a baby coming home from the bar. Well, anyway, one day we'll license music. Anyway, it's a bop, and I
love the comparison.
It's a bop, and I think Midsummer Night's Dream is a bop. It's a Shakespeare bop, and
fun.
Again, like this was the first thing I thought of, but I was like, just based on the titles, and I was like, that's superficial. And then I sat down to watch the movie, and I was like, oh my god, it works. So
there's also, I mean, there's reason in Cruel Summer, like she is in love with this person. I love you. Isn't that the worst thing you've ever heard? But there is sort of this kind of like, there's not a ton of reason behind the song. She just kind of wants this person.
We don't know why it's a Cruel Summer. We don't know we don't have more there.
It's just a killer bridge.
It's a great bridge.
In Midsummer's Night Dream, there's this entire plot where Oberon the fairy wants a baby that Titania the fairy has. And he's like, that I want that. And after we saw the show, my friend, he was like, why did Oberon want the baby? And I was like, I don't know if there's a reason. I think fairies just want things.
Men want anything?
Well, I mean,
I love that I said men and you said fairies. He's a male fairy.
He is a male fairy, but it's also kind of like a fairy thing, like in the time, like you didn't need an explanation. Like fairies just kind of want to do stuff. He hated that answer. My friend did, but I'm pretty sure it's right. I don't think there's a reason. Oberon's just like, I want this baby, and then that like starts the plot of the entire thing.
That's literally the whole. Yeah, that's the reason they have the little fairy dust. And
isn't there like lore in like English folklore where like fairies would change out babies or like steal babies?
Yeah, changelings. Yeah, there is. And I think the idea is like there's maybe some power or something with the baby, but we're not given any backstory. He's just like, I want that baby. Let me set off the plot that changes everyone's lives. And you kind of get this in the song of like, it's not that it's like a shallow song, but we're not getting into All Too Well. We're not getting into like this huge backstory. It's just like, I love that person and I kind of want them and I want to go for it. And so it kind of gives me that vibe too of like, we don't need backstory. There's something someone wants and we're gonna follow that path.
It's a bad boy shiny toy with a price. Like,
that's why.
Just calling the boy a toy.
Yeah.
The last thing I'll say to tie it all together about the fever dream, because this first line in the song is fever dream, high in the quiet of the night. The last part of this play is one of the most famous parts. If we shadows have offended, think but this, and all is mended, that you have but slumbered here while these visions did appear. And this weak and idle theme, no more yielding, but a dream. Gentles, do not reprehend. If you pardon, we will mend. So he's literally saying, like, if this is like too much for you, just, it was a dream. That's it. It's cool. It's a dream. Similarly, Taylor Swift, fever dream. Maybe this whole summer, all this shit, just a dream. Gonna move on.
Move on to the fall.
To All Too Well. Anyway, that may be where we move on from this literal epic episode. Thanks for joining us. We had a whole lot of fun. We'll probably have to do this again. Shakespeare has a couple more things he wrote, right? We might be able to find some more.
We could maybe like pick one play we all do songs with instead of all picking
that would be cool.
plays next time.
I like that idea. Let's do it. But next week we will be deep diving love story. So join us when we do that.